It's The Real News. I'm Aaron Mate. The special counsel investigation of alleged Russian meddling in the U.S. election is increasing its focus on President Trump. Special counsel Robert Mueller has asked the White House for extensive documents related to Trump's time in office. Mueller's probe runs parallel to 3 congressional investigations into the Trump campaign and Russia. But outside the government, there's a lot going on too. Media outlets and liberal organizations have devoted extensive time and energy to Russiagate. And this week, a new group joined the fray. It's called the Committee to Investigate Russia. Its board includes Rob Reiner, the well-known actor, producer, and liberal activist, and several right-wing pundits, including David Frum, the man who coined George W. Bush's infamous phrase, the axis of evil. The committee's kickoff video features the actor Morgan Freeman.
We have been attacked. We are at war. We need our president to speak directly to us and tell us the truth. We need him to sit behind the desk in the Oval Office and say, my fellow Americans, during this past election, we came under attack by the Russian government. I've called on Congress and our intelligence community to use every resource available to conduct a thorough investigation to determine exactly how this happened. The free world is counting on us for leadership. For 241 years, our democracy has been a shining example to the world of what we can all aspire to. And we owe it to the brave people who have fought and died to protect this great nation and save democracy. And we owe it to our future generations to continue the fight.
Join the Committee to Investigate Russia. Join the fight.
Joining me is Max Blumenthal, best-selling author, journalist, senior editor of AlterNet's Gray Zone Project, and co-host of the new podcast, Moderate Rebels. Max, welcome. I'm going to predict that you're not joining this fight.
I mean, this is sad. It's sad for Morgan Freeman. And I think, whatever you think about Russia, you can agree with me that this is probably his worst role since driving Miss Daisy. Now he's driving basically the PNAC train, Project for a New American Century, driving the neocons. I mean, it's highly unusual for me. Maybe I'm wrong here to hear a Black American say that America has been a shining example of democracy for 241 years. It sounds like something that a neocon would write in a script and put before Morgan Freeman in a teleprompter. 200 years ago, late or longer, he would have been, scrubbing Thomas Jefferson's chamber pot. So this is not, this is just deeply disturbing American exceptionalism. But beyond that, I mean, Morgan Freeman has basically been brought into this by Rob Reiner, who's been brought in by a cast of neocons, not just unindicted Iraq War criminal David Frum, who crafted the axis of evil phrase, which has helped spread instability and death around the world, but Max Boot, the neoconservative pundit, who's and self-styled historian who's never met a war he didn't like. We also have James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence and NSA director, affiliated with this group, the Committee to Investigate Russia. Max Boot is a fellow at the Institute for the Study of War, which is run by Kimberly Kagan, who's part of the neoconservative Kagan dynasty. And the Institute for the Study of War is funded primarily by the arms industry and surveillance industry. And their job is basically to gin up wars and consult for generals and make a windfall profit in the process. That's what the Committee to Investigate Russia is about, and it brings this Hollywood element to it. So Rob Reiner's involvement helps get David Frum, on CNN and on a host of radio, MSNBC programs. It almost makes a neocon like him seem likable, although he's also been, he and Max Boot were welcomed with open arms by the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. So in many ways, we're experiencing still the toxic effluvia of the Clinton camp with this bizarre initiative. Now, we have to first ask, what is the Committee to Investigate Russia? It reminds me of the Committee on the Present Danger, which was a Cold War collection of neoconservatives, as well as the Project for a New American Century, which was a larger conglomeration of neoconservatives looking to take advantage of the post-Cold War atmosphere to gin up a war on terror. And what they said in their initial document was that, short of a catalyzing event, we won't be able to realize our goals. 3 years later, 9/11 happened, and that was the catalyzing event. They are attempting to manufacture a catalyzing event through the narrative of, Trump-Russia collusion in order to ramp up hostilities with Russia, not just in Russia's near abroad in Ukraine, but also in Syria and, across the world. And, this is an incredibly dangerous prospect.
There's a piece today in the Daily Beast picking up on this Facebook story, which you and I haven't discussed yet on The Real News, but it's gotten a lot of attention. A few weeks ago, Facebook disclosed that some $100,000 was spent on Facebook ads by suspected Russian accounts that may be tied to the Kremlin. It was a bit ambiguous. Most of the ads were in 2015, a year before the election. And most of the ads, Facebook said, were not even directly to do with the election, but about divisive social issues. But this was taken as a new level of Russian influence in the U.S. And just today on the Daily Beast, which has been all over this story, there's an exclusive written by 4 reporters. A team of 4 reporters writes, exclusive, Russians appear to use Facebook to push Trump rallies in 17 U.S. cities. Subheading is, Being Patriotic, a Facebook group uncovered by the Daily Beast, is the first evidence of suspected Russian provocateurs explicitly mobilizing Trump supporters in real life.
Maybe it's true. Maybe these 4 reporters found something that might be true. But if you read into the 9th paragraph of that article, like so many articles about Russiagate, these 4 reporters, the finest minds of the Daily Beast, including Spencer Ackerman, who wrote the foreword to Russiagate Huckster, Malcolm Nance's book on how the election was stolen, and I think his book might have come out before the election was decided. If you read into the 9th paragraph, you realize that the story is not confirmed, that Facebook explicitly states that it cannot confirm that any of these accounts are Russian accounts. And throughout the article, the authors are forced to refer to them as suspected Russian accounts. So I don't know how this got past an editor, except that there is so much zeal at the Daily Beast to keep up with the Trump-Russia collusion narrative that generates clicks. That's the same, I would assume, the same mentality that prevails among the producers of Rachel Maddow's show, which you wrote about really clearly and effectively. And I think it's not just the narrative that's driven by political zeal, but also desire for ratings and clicks. So no point in this piece do they ever establish that these are Russian accounts. It is possible that this Facebook account in question, this pro-Trump Facebook account, turned to a Russian bot farm. That's kind of what a lot of accounts do. They pay some bot farm to boost their profile on Facebook. And one of the things that bot farms do is they generate they'll direct users to political ads, political hot button issues, because that's what gets people engaged. But again, there's no evidence here. What I found really interesting about this article, and this is true for the previous Daily Beast article that Spencer Ackerman published about Facebook suspected, alleged, possible Russian bots, is that he turns to a fake Russia expert named Clint Watts, who's a former FBI agent. And if you actually look at Clint Watts' work and you're, just remotely informed about politics in the U.S., I think you'll realize that this character is a complete crank. And if we actually lived in a actual meritocracy that relied on real experts, he would be out with a metal detector looking for loose change on the beach or in some public park. But instead, he too is testifying before Congress. He testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee, Clint Watts, that Black Lives Matter's, the chaos of Black Lives Matter was spawned by RT and Sputnik. And he links to an RT article about Black Lives Matter as his evidence, along with the Bundy Ranch chaos. This too was a Russian active measure. Yeah, the Bundy Ranch, Russia had a huge hand in that. This is someone testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Even worse, he goes on to talk about an article he wrote with Will McCants and Mike Duran, who are these kind of Beltway think tankers presented as terror experts. He wrote it in Foreign Affairs, which is the journal of the Council on Foreign Relations. And it was an article lobbying the US government, the Obama administration, to send arms to Ahrar al-Sham, which is a Salafi jihadist rebel group in Syria. And the teaser of this article, I mean, it's unbelievable. The teaser of this article is an al-Qaeda linked group we can be friends with. So, you know, the article comes out, Clint Watts gets mocked heavily on Twitter. I think I might have been among the people mocking him, but again, I'm a Russian bot. Spalatsky, Goratskura, you know, I'm malfunctioning right now. No, actually, you know, real people mocked Clint Watts on Twitter just justifiably. He was calling for supporting an al-Qaeda ally in Syria. And so he goes before the Senate and says that this is when I noticed that there were Russian active measures in an influence campaign, because I was being mocked on Twitter for this article. He doesn't say what the article is. He kind of covers up the content. But this kind of elucidates this testimony elucidates the kind of Russia experts that are being relied on to prove that there is this vast information warfare campaign, this Gerasimov doctrine employed by Russia. And it's Clint Watts is part of a larger initiative spun out of the failed Clinton campaign. It includes people like Laura Rosenberger, who was a foreign policy advisor to Hillary Clinton. And I guess this should scare anyone to consider that these people would have been involved in foreign policy decisions. Andrew Weisbord, I think, is another. And then there's J.M. Berger, who's part of the kind of, you know, terror jihadology industry. And he never really established himself as much of a major expert there, but now, you know, the hype is all around Russia. So he's rebranded himself as a kind of Russia expert. And they have an initiative called the Alliance for Securing Democracy. And if you go on the Alliance for Securing Democracy's website, it's almost as entertaining as the Committee to Investigate Russia. They have a chart that shows kind of the Russia information threat matrix. And they're addressing all of the different websites, including the National Review, maybe they'll, you know, name the Real News Today, that are echoing Kremlin propaganda. Now, how do they determine what the Kremlin's propaganda is? They not only look at RT and Sputnik, they have a list that they refused to release of 600 Russian bots or Russian-controlled social media accounts. And as I said, they refused to name what these social media accounts are. Scott Shane, the New York Times reporter, he published another one of these exposés that exposes nothing, and by the 9th paragraph, you realize the whole thing is unconfirmed and is based on suspicions and speculation. And he determined that a lot of these supposed Russian bots he was supposed to be looking at were actually real people. One you can look at is Marcel Sardo, real people who just simply don't believe in a unipolar world, and they support Russia as a counter-hegemonic force. I know this is impossible for, you know, Beltway insiders and coastal elites to believe, but there are people who actually think that way and are on Twitter. So you're basically looking at a gigantic scam. And, you know, scams are bad as they are. Like Amway's bad. It rips a lot of people off and makes money for, you know, right-wingers. But this is a pro-war scam that has effectively deep six diplomacy with Russia, which could have been, you know, effective in establishing stability in certain areas. 1.4 million people are displaced in Ukraine. Syria is a complete mess. The U.S. has to work with Russia there to defeat ISIS. But this is just dangerous on a global scale. And so it's important to call out these scam initiatives and to completely scrutinize and hound the you know, fraudmeisters and neocons behind it.
All right, that's going to wrap part 1 of this discussion with Max Blumenthal. Stay tuned for part 2.